Science. Buddhism is often referred to as a science of the mind. Many Buddhist teachers proudly claim they see many parallels between the teachings of the Buddha and the discoveries of modern physics, as though physics, with its emphasis on the properties of energy and matter, were a legitimate standard by which to validate the truth of the Buddha's teaching on consciousness and perception. Some have voiced the hope that from a dialogue between science and Buddhism, a new and more enlightened vision of the world could very well emerge. Whereas, examined from a Buddhist point of view, we are actually creating the world by the very act of interpreting our perceptions of the world. Instead of trying to turn Buddhism into a science, we should instead be aware of things as they are, without imposing any conceptual framework on them. Direct knowing, not theory, is at stake. What is experienced may be beyond description, not because it is some indefinable occurrence, but because it is a human experience, which is unique to the moment it occurred and cannot easily be reduced to a conceptual category. Although science does stand as a remarkable tool for analysis, we must understand its proper scope and its limitations with clarity of mind. When we examine the scientific method carefully, we see it deals exclusively with what can be measured, observed, and tested through the physical senses. Consider first the matter of scientific hypotheses. When scientists attempt to explain any phenomenon, they face the inherent limitation that there are endless, possible rational explanations for what they observe. Like trying to identify an unseen object by its shadow alone, they imagine countless different objects that could cast that same shadow. This means they can never test every possible hypothesis, and therefore can never arrive at an absolute proof of any scientific theory. This leads us to a deeper problem in scientific inquiry. How can science study its own methods when it lacks an independent standard of measurement? Because of this dilemma, when science attempts to validate scientific methodology using the same methodology, it creates a circular argument that undermines its own foundation. Added to that limitation, science cannot investigate that which lies beyond the realm of physical phenomena, in the same way that a ruler cannot measure weight and scales cannot measure length. Can science measure metta, for example? Can it quantify the peace that comes from samadhi? Can it put the Four Noble Truths under a microscope? The very suggestion shows its limitations, for these factors are among the most fundamental and important aspects of human existence, as well as the path to liberation. Many modern scientists, particularly those who have gained prominence in the West, have fallen into what the Lord Buddha would recognize as a form of wrong view. They have become so enamored with the success gained by the scientific method in its own sphere that they have convinced themselves it is the only valid way of knowing anything. This attitude is rather like a carpenter becoming so skilled with his hammer that he begins to think every problem can be solved by hammering. Scientists will say, "Give us enough time and funding, and we will reduce consciousness, morality, and the meaning of life itself to entirely physical processes in the brain." Many such people become lost in intellectual mazes of scientific and philosophical speculation, while their fundamental moral development remains neglected. This is like studying advanced mathematics while still being unable to count from 1 to 100, in which case the practice lacks an essential foundation. The Buddha's teachings, on the other hand, always point us toward what is practical and essential for our development on the path. Both science and Buddhist practice aim at understanding reality, but they operate at different levels and serve different purposes. The wise practitioner knows how to use each one appropriately, without becoming confused by apparent contradictions between conventional truth and ultimate truth. Consider what science has actually given us. We can now manipulate our own genetic code, alter our brain chemistry, and reshape the very matter of our bodies. These are powerful tools indeed. Yet who is wielding these tools? The same human minds that have always been subject to greed, hatred, and delusion. Science can split the atom, but it cannot remove the defilements that might lead someone to use that knowledge destructively. It can sequence the genome, but cannot sequence the path to genuine happiness. The scientist's understanding of the world is always changing, always being revised. What was scientific fact 50 years ago is often considered primitive misunderstanding today. And what passes for settled science today will likely seem quaint and outdated 50 years hence. This is not intended as a criticism. It is expected that scientific knowledge will evolve as new evidence is uncovered. But it shows us that science deals with conventional relative truth, or sammuti satcha, not the ultimate truth of paramatta satcha. The cause and effect nature of reality means that nothing happens randomly or without reason. Every experience, every state of mind, every circumstance arises dependent on conditions. When those conditions change, the experience also changes. This is why the practice of Dhamma focuses on understanding and working with causes, rather than struggling with effects. When we contemplate deeper questions like, why are we here? What is the purpose of life? How should we live? Science falls silent. These questions cannot be answered by measuring brainwaves or analyzing chemical reactions. They require direct investigation of the mind itself, using the methods the Buddha discovered and verified through his own experience. This is why the Buddha's teaching remains as relevant today as it was 2,500 years ago. The fundamental problems of human existence, suffering and its causes, cannot be solved simply through external investigation, no matter how sophisticated our instruments are. They require the internal science of mind development, of morality, samadhi, and wisdom. That is a territory where science has no access, but one where only the Dhamma can show us the way. Science is a valuable tool, but like any tool, it must be guided by wisdom and used with right understanding. The real work to achieve freedom from suffering lies beyond science's reach, in the direct investigation and purification of our own minds. When we examine how scientists pursue knowledge, we see that they follow a path not unlike that of blind men feeling different parts of an elephant. They grope in darkness, constructing theories from limited evidence, much like we ourselves try to catch a glimpse of reality through the blinkers of our defilements. These theories are really just concepts built on other concepts. Scientists create a mental picture they believe represents reality, then keep adjusting it as new evidence shows where it falls short. This constant refinement might seem like progress, but it's still just trading one set of concepts for another. The underlying delusion which believes that ultimate truth can be found through the five senses and intellectual speculation, that delusion remains unchanged. This brings us to a crucial point about the influence materialistic science has on modern society. People have come to worship at the altar of the senses, believing that nothing exists beyond what can be measured and quantified. This view has spread like a virus through television, newspapers, and the internet, infecting minds with the notion that sensual pleasure is the highest aim of human life. But this obsession with the sensory world is really a kind of bondage, though people often mistake it for freedom. They think they're liberated by rejecting moral precepts and spiritual disciplines. They imagine they can escape responsibility for their actions by reducing everything to chemistry and physics. It's all just atoms bouncing around, they say. How can there be any real choices or consequences? This is a dangerous delusion. The law of karma operates whether we believe in it or not, just as gravity doesn't care whether you believe in it when you step off a cliff. Every human action bears fruit according to its nature. No scientific theory can change this fundamental truth. The real path to freedom isn't found through indulging the senses or constructing elaborate intellectual theories. It's realized through training the mind to see things as they truly are. This requires virtue, concentration, and most importantly, wisdom, which is the direct insight that comes from looking inward rather than outward. Scientists may someday discover that their theories are just sophisticated forms of ignorance. But until they turn their investigation toward the mind itself, which is the source of all theories and concepts, they'll remain caught in an endless cycle of speculation, never touching upon the ultimate truth that the Buddha revealed. The way forward isn't to reject science entirely, but instead to understand its proper place. It's a useful tool for dealing with the material world, but it cannot answer the fundamental questions of existence or show us the path to genuine happiness and liberation. For that, we must follow the Buddha's path of practice, using the tools of sila, samadhi, and panya to penetrate beyond concepts to reach the unconditioned reality that transcends all theories and beliefs. When we examine what scientists call truth, we find a peculiar situation. Scientists observe and measure physical phenomena, like the interactions of matter and energy in the universe. From these observations, they formulate what they call laws. But these laws themselves possess neither matter nor energy. They exist purely as concepts within the minds of those who formulate them. This presents us with a profound dilemma. The very foundation of scientific understanding, mathematical principles, logical reasoning, and theoretical frameworks, all these dwell exclusively within the realm of mind. They have no physical existence whatsoever. The scientist cannot point to a law of physics and say, "There it is." They can only point to symbols on paper or equations in books, which are merely representations of mental concepts. Yet scientists seem curiously uninterested in investigating the mind that is so central to their work. They use their minds constantly to theorize, analyze, and draw conclusions, but they never turn their attention inward to examine the nature of the mind itself. The Buddha's approach was fundamentally different. Before making any claims about reality, he first investigated awareness itself, focusing on the nature of consciousness and the process of knowing. Through direct investigation, he discovered that the mind has an inherent tendency to create concepts and then cling to them as being real. This attachment to concepts, what the Buddha called theories and views, is actually a major source of suffering. The scientist develops theories about the physical world while remaining ignorant of the very instrument, the mind, that's being used to develop these theories. But how can we trust the evaluations of an instrument whose nature and limitations we do not understand? It's like trying to make precise measurements with a poorly calibrated tool. In the Buddha's method, we first examine our tool, the mind, through direct experience. We observe its habits, its tendencies, its distortions. We see how it creates concepts and then mistakes these concepts for reality. Only when we understand this process can we begin to see things as they truly are, rather than as we suppose them to be. The scientific mind, on the other hand, builds elaborate theoretical structures without first acquainting itself with the builder. These structures, impressive as they may seem, are still just mental fabrications, arising from ignorance of the mind's true nature. Until we investigate and understand the mind itself, we cannot truly understand anything else. This is why the Buddha emphasized direct knowing over theoretical knowledge. Theory can only take us so far. Real understanding comes from investigating our own experience, especially those experiences that occur within the field of our conscious awareness. Only then can we see the true relationship between mind and reality, between the knower and the known. When we look deeply into the basis of scientific knowledge, we see that it rests upon shifting sands. Each new discovery overwrites what came before, so what scientists hold as absolute truth today may later be discarded as ineffective. How different this is from what the Lord Buddha realized seated under the Bodhi tree. Those truths that are timeless, unchanging, and point directly to the heart of our human predicament. What science offers us are conventional truths, which may be useful for worldly purposes, but cannot touch the deeper truths that the Buddha discovered. Those conventional truths are like the reflection of the moon in water, constantly shifting, breaking apart, and reforming, while Dhamma truth is like the moon itself, unchanging and reliable in its orbit. Most troubling is how the glitter and excitement of scientific progress has hypnotized people, drawing their attention exclusively to the external world. They become fascinated by new gadgets, new ideas, new possibilities, all of which point away from the one truth that could actually free them from suffering. The Buddha's teaching about dukkha and its cessation remains unseen by them, hidden behind a veil of technological marvels and achievements. To find the way out of suffering, we must turn our attention in the opposite direction from where science points us. We must not look outward at phenomena, but inward to the nature of our own minds. We must investigate not the behavior of subatomic particles, but rather behavior controlled by greed, hatred, and delusion. We should not be seeking new discoveries, but instead uncovering that which has always been true. The Lord Buddha's teachings are like a bright lamp that has never dimmed since the very first time he shared them. But people today, dazzled by the fireworks of scientific progress, have trouble seeing this steady light. Yet, for those with the wisdom to look, the way to the end of suffering remains as clear and practical as ever. The question is, are we willing to turn our attention away from the fascinating show of worldly knowledge and look directly at the truth in our own hearts? The Lord Buddha's teaching reveals to us something quite profound about the nature of the universe we inhabit. The spiritual universe he called samsara isn't concerned with planets and stars, or with physical matter at all. Rather, it is fundamentally a realm of mind and consciousness, brought into being and sustained by the karma of countless living beings throughout beginningless time. This may sound rather strange to the modern ear, trained as we are in scientific thinking. But consider this: everything you know about the universe, everything you've ever experienced, comes to you through conscious awareness. Even the most sophisticated scientific measurements must be perceived and interpreted by a conscious mind. This consciousness, this knowing nature, is the very foundation of all our experience. The scientists are doing their very best with the tools they have. They've developed remarkable instruments and mathematical models to study the physical universe. But they're rather like someone trying to understand the nature of water by merely looking at the waves on the surface. They can measure the height and frequency of the waves with great precision, but they miss entirely water's essential nature, its wetness. What's particularly interesting is how scientific opinion seems to keep bumping up against its own limitations. Take the question of the universe's beginning and ending. Despite all their equations and theories, whether it's the Big Bang, the heat death, the Big Freeze, or what have you, scientists still find themselves in a place of fundamental uncertainty. The more precisely they try to pin down a solution to these questions, the more the answers seem to evade their grasp. This reminds me of something the Lord Buddha often emphasized: the danger of getting lost in speculation about matters that do not lead to liberation. Because whether the physical universe began with a bang or a whimper, whether it ends in fire or in ice, these questions, fascinating as they may be, do not address the fundamental problem of suffering and its cessation. The Buddhist understanding goes deeper. It shows us that the perception of physical phenomena, like the stars, the galaxies, and all the rest, is the manifestation of a more essential reality of mind and awareness. Because the various realms of existence are not physical locations at all. Instead, they are states of consciousness, created and maintained by the moral force of the intentional actions of living beings. The Buddha wasn't interested in creating a competing cosmological theory. His practical teaching was always aimed at liberation from suffering. When we understand that consciousness and karma are fundamental to the nature of the universe we perceive, we begin to see where our real work lies, not in measuring distant galaxies, but rather in purifying our own minds. This is what many of us miss in our modern fascination with scientific materialism. We've become so focused on the outer world that we've neglected the inner one. But it's precisely this inner realm, the realm of consciousness and karma, that holds the key to understanding not just the universe, but our own true nature as well. The Lord Buddha was not a divine being. He was a human being like ourselves, though one who had developed himself to the uttermost perfection through countless lives. Through aeons of time, he had taken birth in myriad forms, as animals, as humans, and as celestial beings, as he steadily accumulated the most sublime and potent spiritual perfections through his tireless efforts and unwavering determination. On that most auspicious night when the Buddha sat down under the Bodhi tree, his mind, having been perfectly cultivated through countless lifetimes, penetrated to the deepest truths of existence. In the first watch of the night, his consciousness expanded backwards through time, witnessing the vast cycles of his own previous lives, stretching back through the periodic expansion and contraction of countless world systems. No matter how far back his vision reached, he could find no point of a first beginning, because samsara, the wheel of existence, has neither start nor conclusion. As the middle watch approached, his mind's eye opened still further to encompass all living beings throughout the cosmos. He witnessed directly how beings arise and pass away, moving from one state to another in accordance with their karma. Like actors in an infinite drama, all beings are bound together in an intricate web of relationships extending throughout time, their destinies shaped by the inexorable law of cause and effect, and determined by the quality of actions and their consequences. The supreme enlightenment that dawned in the Buddha's consciousness was not mere philosophical speculation or theoretical inference, nor was it an intellectual framework pieced together from observation and logic, forever subject to revision when new evidence comes to light. On the contrary, it was direct knowledge born of perfect understanding, an immediate and unmediated perception of the cosmic law of karma, working itself out through the lives of countless beings. The Buddha perceived with absolute clarity how each action, whether of body, speech, or mind, sets in motion ripples of future consequences that must inevitably bear fruit. These waves of cause and effect, interweaving and building upon each other, drive the endless cycle of existence forward. It is this perpetual interplay of action and result, operating on the grandest cosmic scale, that maintains the ceaseless movement of samsara, like a great wheel revolving in perpetual motion. This direct knowledge penetrated to the very heart of reality, revealing the fundamental truths that govern all existence. Such insight transcends mere intellectual understanding. It is wisdom born of direct knowing, which is as different from theoretical knowledge as being in the ocean is different from reading about it. Through his supreme enlightenment, the Buddha was able to show us not just the nature of existence, but also the path to liberation from its endless cycle. In this profound vision, he saw not only the operation of cosmic law, but also its cessation, the possibility of complete freedom from existence on the wheel of birth and death. This is the heart of the Buddha's teaching, that through developing virtue and wisdom, any being can follow in his footsteps and attain to this same liberation. When we speak of the Lord Buddha's enlightenment, we must understand that it was a total opening of mind, not just a partial understanding, but a complete penetration of reality. In that state, karma and rebirth were seen directly, not as theories or beliefs, but as fundamental truths of existence. Unfortunately, most of us are like people living in a very small room with tiny windows. We peer out through these windows and think we see the whole world, but we're seeing only fragments of the full picture. The scientists look through one window and see only material phenomena. The theologians look through another and see only their creator, God. And ordinary people, well, they're so caught up in their personal viewpoints that they hardly look out the windows at all. The Buddha himself broke down all the barriers. When the walls came down, there were no more limitations, no more boundaries. In that state of complete awareness, he saw the whole process of existence, how beings move through countless lives, how actions lead to results, and how the whole wheel of samsara endlessly turns. This revelation isn't something you can debate about or prove through logical argument. You have to experience it directly. That's why the Buddha's teaching is akaliko, timeless in every respect. It's not a theory that can be disproven, or a philosophy that can be disputed. It's a description of reality as it actually is. We all share this same potential for enlightenment. It's there within us, but it's covered up by layers and layers of defilements. It's like a mirror that's been covered with dust for so long that we can no longer see a reflection in it. Our job is to clean that mirror, to remove those coverings. This is where personal responsibility comes in. Everything that happens to us, everything, comes from causes we ourselves have set in motion. This isn't fate or predestination. It's cause and effect, pure and simple. Each thought, each action, each choice we make is creating our future right now. But we fail to see this clearly because our minds are too clouded, too restricted. It was for this reason that the Buddha chose to teach people a gradual path that accorded with the level of their understanding. When people came to him with questions about the origin of the universe or the nature of the infinite, he simply remained silent. Why? Because answering these questions does not lead to freedom from suffering. The questioners are like the man shot with an arrow who refuses treatment until he knows what kind of wood the arrow was made from, and who shot it, because he refuses to recognize that there is an urgent need to remove the arrow quickly. That's why the Buddha focused on suffering and the end of suffering. This is the heart of the matter. This is what's relevant to our liberation. Everything else is just speculation. The truth of suffering and its cessation is the one truth that never changes, never becomes outdated, never needs revision. It's as true now as it was 2,500 years ago, and it will remain true as long as living beings exist. Meditation practice isn't about believing or accepting these truths blindly, however. It's about actively investigating and looking deeply into our own experience. When we do this properly, with strong mindfulness and wisdom, we begin to see the truth for ourselves. When the dust starts to clear from our eyes, we begin to understand why the Buddha taught what he did. When we first encounter the complexity of the world, what do? We create stories, theories, and views to try to make sense of it all. We then take these views and act as though they were absolute truth. It is natural for the mind to cling to what it thinks it knows. But here's the important point. Through direct experience, where we actually test these views against what's true, we begin to see where they don't really fit. It's like walking around in the dark. At first we might mistake a rope for a snake, but in the light of closer investigation, we recognize our misperception. A key point to note here is that progress toward truth doesn't require starting with perfect understanding. What it requires is honesty, the willingness to look directly at our experience and admit where our current understanding falls short. This is why the Buddha emphasized direct investigation over mere belief or theory. The way of Buddhist practice does not involve passing down ancient scrolls of wisdom, with each generation carefully preserving the truth, as though it were a sacred duty. Rather, it is like being taught how to use a particular set of tools that have been tested and refined through centuries of dedicated practice. These tools help you strip away the layers of confusion until you discover what has always been there, a naturally clear awareness. Through patient application of these tools, you begin to see things as they truly are. This seeing reveals that nothing can be permanently labeled as true or false. These are merely concepts we overlay upon experience. What you discover instead is the ceaseless flow of phenomena, arising, persisting briefly, and passing away. You notice how your mind creates suffering by resisting this flow, desperately trying to hold on to what is pleasant and push away what is unpleasant. Most significantly, you realize there is no separate self standing apart from all this activity. In truth, the very idea of such a self is just another concept, another overlay upon direct experience. This clarity of knowing is not hidden away in ancient temples or reserved for special individuals. It manifests naturally for anyone who applies these tools with sincere effort and patience. It does not arise from clever philosophical arguments or from accepting religious dogmas. It cannot be granted by authority figures or institutions, nor can it be used as a weapon to dominate others. It simply reveals itself through a meditator's dedicated practice. As this understanding deepens, you develop a profound appreciation for those who walk this path before you. You begin to comprehend the tremendous courage it took for them to question everything they believed, and to let go of their most cherished ideas about themselves and the world. You see how they too had to face their fears, their doubts, and their attachments, and how they persevered despite these challenges. This appreciation is not just blind devotion to tradition. Instead, it becomes a living connection to the lineage of Buddhist practice, like a bright thread weaving through time. This connection sincerely deepens your own practice, opening doors to even more subtle levels of understanding. You realize that what these ancient practitioners discovered is just as alive and relevant today as it was in their time, because it points to something timeless and universal in human experience. Developed in this way, the practice becomes both deeply personal and completely universal. It comes from your own direct investigation, yet it confirms and is confirmed by the experiences of countless practitioners throughout history. This is the real meaning of lineage, not the preservation of dead and dried scriptures, but the living transmission of methods that each person must verify for themselves.